All right, hello everyone. My name is Maria, and today I wanted to share my knowledge with you about vocabulary and revision. Revision not only of vocabulary, also of grammar chunks, vocabulary chunks, and so on. So I for today I set these four goals for us. The first one is to simply understand or revise how memory works and how the process of memorizing words works, to become more aware of the ways we can actually help our students learn vocabulary. I am convinced that you know of all of them in practice. However, like they say in CELTA, you can do whatever you want in your lessons as long as you know why you're doing it. So today we will make sure that we do know why we do one thing or another. The third point is the difference between revision and recycling. For the longest time, it'd been the same thing to me. But then I learned that they are quite different. So today we are gonna point out the difference. And the last point is my Miro board that you can access if you message me, if you hadn't messaged me yet. And there you will see 17 exercise frameworks you can use for revision. So, vocabulary, revision. I'll take a wild guess and assume that you're here because at least once in your career you experienced this feeling when you're either preparing for a lesson or making a lesson, or you were conducting a lesson and you felt at a loss because you were not sure how to make revision, how to make learning vocabulary more efficient or more exciting, or just do something different instead of repeating the same gap fills or whatever it is you are used to doing. I think for me it is gap fills. At least it did happen to me as well. So originally I was creating this Miro board for myself for the days when I feel at a loss, the lack of creativity, so that I can just open it, see the framework, take it, and implement it in my lessons. That's what I hope it will do for you as well. But before we do, I actually wanted to get something out of the way. There's a quote that I bumped into when I was preparing for this webinar, and I want to read it out loud for you. Vocabulary cannot be taught. It can be presented, explained, included in all kinds of activities, and experienced in all manner of associations. But ultimately, it is learned by the individual. As language teachers, we must arouse interest in words and a certain excitement in personal development in this area. We can help our students by giving them ideas on how to learn, but each will finally learn a very personal selection of items organized in relationships in an individual way. So this is the moment where your shoulders drop and you share the responsibility for learning with your students. So, memory. How many memory systems do we have? Do you know what they're called? You can put this video on pause and attempt to recall, access the knowledge in this area. And we have three. Starting with short-term store. It is the brain's capacity to hold a very, very limited item of piece of information, to use it immediately and forget about it. We often use it when we need to insert a code from an SMS. Students need it in order to repeat the sentence or repeat the word after a teacher. Repeat a sentence with the same intonation after a teacher. That's all, gone. Working memory. This is memory, the type of memory where the actual learning happens, because this is when the information stays there for enough time for it to access the previously learned facts and attempt to find a connection, to make a connection between the two, the old one and the new one. And the long-term memory, of course. This is a sort of mind palace where all the information is stored, and you can envision it as a sort of two rows with an aisle in the middle, and one row is the quickly forgotten, and the other row is the never forgotten. So our goal as teachers and students is, of course, to move everything firstly to long-term memory and secondly to this never forgotten aisle. And let's see what we need to do to actually facilitate this process. Of course, we need to have a lot of repetition. We need to use basically all these principles. All these principles have to take place in our lessons and beyond. Of course, what we can encourage, and we must encourage our students, because like I said, it's a two-way street, to use their motivation. We can help them to find motivation in studying, in learning, but they need to have access to it as well, to keep going. We can help them realize their pace. We can help them understand if they have to move quicker in order to keep this interest, or maybe they need to slow down. We, of course, can help them discover what is the best way to organize it, what is the best way to relate the vocabulary that we learn to them. But all these things should happen within the classroom time and within the studying time alone. Another question is what we can use for teaching vocabulary. The quick answer is everything. It can be the course book, the workbook, whatever other students are saying. If you're teaching a group, it can also provide you with material to teach to other students. You can exploit listening scripts and texts. Sometimes it can be new for students to use these tools for such a purpose as learning vocabulary. Listening can be solely listening for them. You can introduce it to them by doing it together in class, especially in course books like Outcomes. There are such gems in there. It's a shame to just omit it and use it solely as a listening activity. And of course, if you feel that there isn't enough vocabulary, you can give it to the students yourselves by modeling, by telling them stories, including some juicy vocab into it, so they practice both listening and learn some new vocabulary. So another thing that we need to make sure that it is taking place in our classes is we need to make sure that our students' brains work, and they work on various levels. So from the easiest the lower level of cognitive demand to the higher level of cognitive demand. I will give you the initial letters of each stage of working with words vocabulary based on how cognitively demanding they are. And you can pause the video here as well. Try to think, what kind of task is this? And here they are. So we start from the least cognitively demanding ones, and we'll finish with the ranking as the most cognitively demanding task, with production there as well. We are going to touch it a bit later, but now I want to look at every stage and the types of exercises you can use on each stage. The question is, do you have to go through all of these steps? No. But it depends on the material that you're teaching. If you're sure that the material that you're teaching, the words, the grammar is very new, it might be worth starting from the lower level and attempting maybe 2, 3, identifying, selecting, matching, and then having sorting and ranking, for example, as done as homework to continue to facilitate the brain work, to make the students make these connections and to grow these connections in their memory. So let's take a look at identifying. Identifying is initially simply recognizing the vocabulary. In reading, it might look like find the words connected with a topic, with a particular topic. With grammar, it can be find phrasal verbs, find comparative adjectives, find present simple, and so on. In listening with children, we often do, when you hear this word, clap your hands. In this case, raise your hand when you hear specific items. You can rank them, you can put them in order, you can tick the words that you hear. Worksheets like word searches or unscrambling diagrams are all here. They're discovering form, they're discovering meaning, they're discovering the words or the grammar that you want them to learn. This is sort of a preparation stage for the further learning. Next one is selecting. So the students need to firstly recognize and then make a choice about this vocabulary. For example, odd one out is a very good example of such a task where there is no right answer as long as the student can explain their choice, can justify their choice, and you can use it as a continuation as an extension of this task. It's okay. Any choice counts because it is the cognitive work that is more important here than getting the right answer according to someone else's logic, for example. Describing a person where a person has to pick and choose the vocabulary that they want to use about a person, or simply an oral quiz in pairs at the beginning of the lesson, for example. The next stage is matching, where students have to recognize and pair it. So also make a decision, make a choice, but a more cognitively demanding one because you need to match it this time with a visual representation or a translation or maybe a collocate if the students are higher level ones. Sorting is the penultimate step in this ladder. So when we are sorting, we can either give learners the category in which they need to put the items, or they can guess the categories themselves, or they can come up with categories. For example, it can be something like characteristics, positives or negatives. Just today, I was teaching an English for specific purposes, a lesson about job interviews, and we were sorting the lines based on who would say them, interviewer or interviewee. Another example of this task. And the last one is ranking and sequencing. It can be something related to at the very beginner level, adverbs of frequency when you need to arrange them on a line. It can be something ranking based on the preference, like here, what you would buy first, what you would buy last, and why. You could use it as classifying knowledge, like according to its usefulness, according to its value, and chronological order, like here, for example, the actions you need to do before the flight and after the flight. In these types of tasks, it is very important to compare with classmates, or if it's an individual lesson with a teacher, because it gives the students the opportunity to actually hear these words one more time, plus process your reasoning. So it's an excellent practice for listening on a higher level and hear your justification of your choice. Production tasks as the cherry on top of the cake. So we have essentially two types of production tasks. They are either completion of sentences or texts with sentences and creation of texts, sentences, utterances. My opinion about games, I'm not against them, but I think they're a good tool and you can use them sporadically when you need to add a little twist, a little fun component to your to your lessons, because most often games require only shallow processing, only surface level activation of the vocabulary without deeper processing, without this cognitive demand. So we are literally on this identifying level, but they do make the lessons more fun. So I do like to use them, but um, very judiciously. So, what to revise? It is a very good question because there are two parties in learning. There are students and there are teachers. So it can be either student initiated or teacher initiated. I found this example in the Yulia Komichova's conference, and one of the speakers was presenting the ways of revision that she uses that are student initiated. So she'd ask her students to go through the units and she'd write a column for them, for example, wherever you work. It can be just an Excel sheet or Docs, Google Docs, with their names on top, and they need to fill it in with the items that they feel they have forgotten or they feel that they've struggled with. It can be both grammar and vocabulary. Or the second picture, you can use it at the end of the lesson when you're doing a revision lesson as a feedback. You arrange it into 3 columns: 100%, 50%, 25%, and ask the students to fill it in once again. We can often see it in the course books for children, where they need to um, sometimes to circle the smiley faces or color with green, yellow, or red. However, we don't see it as much in course books for adults. So it is actually a very useful feedback tool for the students themselves. When it comes to choosing what to revise, and the teacher feels like they have to make this choice, it does feel like it just increases the workload. However, there are things that you can do that will help you choose, that will help you make a decision. So, firstly, what I do, not for all classes, I have to admit, but especially for the classes where I feel that learning vocabulary is the priority, I keep track of grammar and vocabulary that we have throughout the units. It can be the target vocabulary, it can be something that I found in an article and we read it together, something that was in the listening script as well. I do explain to my students that this all is not target vocabulary. I don't expect them to memorize all of these words, but it is good for you to keep track of it and to, as you see later on, to make links. What you could also do is create this file, create this table with the names of the units if you're teaching with a course book, and the vocabulary and grammar content on the left. And then you can try and predict where you can use the same vocabulary, where you can use the same grammar, and put it maybe on a sticky note so that the students try to use the same phrases from the vocabulary list that you have. Always, 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 we need to try to think how to connect something that we'd learned before with the new material to create this memory magic, because this is how it happens. This is how our neurons the connection between the neurons becomes stronger and stronger, and that is how it is moved from the working memory into long-term memory, and from the quickly forgotten to the never forgotten. As for recycling and revision, so essentially recycling is just bumping into the language that you'd seen before, that you'd learned before. You can hear it in the listening, you can see it in text, you can see it in some grammar exercises. Whereas revision is a test or an attempt to recall the items and encouragement to reproduce it, to use it again in the same context or a different context. So you can notice this slight but very essential difference between them, where recycling is more passive and revision is more active. So as for recycling, you can use it when modeling speaking tasks, when you want to show the students how you want them to attempt this speaking tasks. When you're explaining some new items, you can refer or use the old vocabulary to, again, to grow this connection, to join the neurons together. You can upgrade students' language and write it in the feedback file, for example, or as I usually do, I just put what the students said in the feedback file in the plus 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 area. And then at the end of the lesson, we go back to it and I'm like, can you remember we had an expression, for example, on the previous lesson, how else can you express it? Sometimes I put the initial letters and dot, 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 so that my students can sort of go back in their mind palace and look for it themselves. And of course, like I mentioned, you can use, for example, grammar exercises with the vocabulary that you had learned previously to keep it going, to keep it fresh in the student's memory. And as for recycling, if you do keep track of, keep a record of all this vocabulary, it will be easier for you to arrange revision in your class. And here I should send you to the Miro board where there are those beautiful 17 beautiful frameworks I love using, and I hope you would enjoy using them too. And there it is. These are the resources that I used to learn more about revision and teaching vocabulary. I highly, highly recommend that you go and check them out yourself. I also follow these beautiful people and I get more inspiration about revision and teaching, and they often share new ways of approaching the same old tasks. So I do recommend that you, if you don't follow them, it is worth it. And there it is. This is it. Thank you very much. I would be very grateful if you could do this feedback activity, not necessarily for me, but purely for yourself, so that you do take the most out of this webinar. So you can choose 3 revision exercises that you really liked from the Miro board and that you are going to try in the next 2 weeks. 2, you can message me and ask any questions that you still have. And if something was new today, write down this one concept that you found interesting and that you would want to learn more about. Like I said, I'm open to questions. If you have, if you're not sure how to implement a certain framework, hit me with a message. If you are not sure how to use a framework, drop me a message. We'll figure it out together. I will do my best to help you. And thank you. That is all from me. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great day. Bye.